Hi, hello, and welcome to another episode of Irrational Confidence, a basketball podcast created by three dudes who love basketball and, just like their favorite players, have the irrational confidence to let every take fly. Here you'll find weekly episodes on league news and transactions, team updates and performances, and fun debates on our favorite NBA topics. My name is Lino, and I'm joined by our hosts Caelan and Micah. We hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Let's get to it.
And welcome in to another episode of Irrational Confidence. I am your host, Micah, joined as always by my fellow hosts, Lino and Caelan. We have a very exciting episode today. We're going to be covering some news and notes and then getting deep into what has been a very exciting conference finals. Not in terms of competitive games when you might think of the series being close, but the actual games have been very highly contested and a lot of fun. So we will be getting into all of that and maybe even a little finals preview at the end. But to start things off, we are going to cover news and notes. And the first news is definitely a somber one to start with, and that is the passing of NBA legend Bill Walton. I'm sure everyone has seen on social media and different things amazing stories about this guy. I never knew him as a player. Obviously, that was well before my time, but he was very entertaining college analyst to listen to call games. There are many viral Twitter clips of him going on hilarious rants that often ended up being very insightful. And he was someone you could tell truly just loved basketball in the most pure way. So definitely a huge loss for the game. Condolences to his family and well wishes to everyone that loved Bill Walton. We will transition from an amazing man who is not too unfamiliar with All NBA teams. We'll transition to the All NBA teams that were announced. It was, I would say, pretty chalk, especially the first team. A lot of the usual suspects everyone was looking for. You had Giannis, you had Luka. I feel like, and Shea as well with Jokic. I feel the last spot was kind of the Brunson versus Tatum spot, and Tatum did come out with that one. And the rest of the teams I felt like went pretty chalk. The only one I was a little about was DeMontis Sabonis over Jaylen Brown. Thought Jaylen Brown had a really nice season. And I do feel like I'm lower on Sabonis than a lot of people. So there's that. And the rest of the news is pretty much all coaching related. So the Cavs fired JB Bickerstaff, which could mean a lot, could mean nothing. Really, the whole summer is going to be based off Donovan Mitchell. So did he like JB Bickerstaff or not? Probably has a lot to do with that decision. So we'll only know really once we hear about if he's signing that extension or not. The Wizards finalized an agreement to make Brian Keefe their permanent head coach. So he was the interim coach for about the second half of the season. And apparently they liked what they saw. So they're going to roll with him. And then finally, Ty Lue did sign an extension with the Clippers. So he'll be there. He'll be well paid. Like we all expected, Steve Ballmer wasn't going to let him walk over finances because there's no salary cap on coaching contracts. So you just pay the man what you need to when you're Steve Ballmer. But yeah, so now I'm excited to get to hear some of my friends' thoughts on what has been a very fun Eastern Conference series, which is where we'll start first. So Pacers Celtics did end. It was a sweep, but anyone who watched it will tell you a very entertaining sweep. There's a great stat I saw on Twitter. I believe it was from Todd Whitehead, and this was the sixth closest margin of victory, like smallest average margin of victory for a sweep since 2003. So it was 6.8 points per game. So all the games were mostly very close. And fun fact, the smallest was Cavs Pacers in 2017. Who knew? But Caelan, I'll throw it to you first. What were your thoughts on this series and just major takeaways about either team, really?
Yeah, dude, this was definitely a wacky series. It was definitely, if you could say, like close sweep. With the Pacers feeling like they probably should have won, at least two of those games. Game one, the Jaylen Brown at the corner three to send it to overtime, and the C's win, and then or excuse me, that was game one, and then game three was the T.J. McConnell game that the Pacers kind of just peed down their leg a little bit there and kind of gave it away. So I think the Celtics have kind of played down to the level of their competition just a bit. I'm excited to see them in the finals. I think they do have another level to get to. I kind of like that it felt like Tatum and Brown really got rolling in this series. I think that was kind of like my main takeaway. Just because the Celtics kind of had a pretty easy road in terms of the teams they played and the injuries that those guys dealt with. But I thought the takeaway was that they at least got into rhythm. It looks like they're playing the best basketball of the playoffs. So that really bodes well for the Celtics. Um, for the Pacers, tough to take away when your main player goes down. Early in the series. But they still played hard, and I thought guys like Andrew Nembhard really kind of showed that maybe they have another gear to get to. So I think Pacers fans can definitely be looking for a improved team. They're obviously very young, so expect those guys to get better. Um, we're going to talk about the offseason a little later, but maybe they can make some adjustments here and there. But I thought overall the Pacers should feel pretty good about how they played. And the only question was maybe the Tyrese Halliburton thing. He kind of picked it up as the playoffs went along, but it's still just a little shaky here and there. But what did you come away with, Lino?
Look, man, the Boston Celtics are screwed. Sure, they won 4 games. Yeah, that's, I guess, the best you can do in a playoff situation and the most you can ask for your team. But the other thing you can ask them to do is not let Andrew Nembhard average 21 points against you in the playoffs and not let him just, cook you for times when your best players are playing their best basketball. Why were these games so close when half of these games didn't have Tyrese Halliburton and the other half had probably a hobbled Tyrese Halliburton? If I'm a Celtics fan, I definitely don't feel good. I definitely am not excited. And if I'm a Celtics fan, I'm feeling unhappy, maybe even, mournful about how this is going. I would kind of wish my team wasn't in the playoffs. That's what I would
Okay.
do if I was a Celtics fan right now. And I definitely wouldn't be feeling good about going to the finals. And if I won the finals, I'd still not feeling really good.
Okay.
Well, now that I got all that out of the way, shout out to the Celtics, man. They took care of business in the way that they should have. They did what they needed to do. They didn't necessarily make it feel the most convincing all the time, given their path here, but that's all semantics and will just be talked about in the deepest streets of Twitter over the next 10 years. But everywhere else, it'll be shown as a successful season for the Celtics to this point. And so shout out to them for getting over the hump in that regard. And now they just have to finish off whatever hobbled team comes out of the West. And that should not be the most difficult thing. But I do really feel like the difficulty that the Jays had against guarding Andrew Nembhard is going to be very challenging when it's either Luka Doncic or Anthony Edwards. So, or even Kyrie Irving. So they're going to have some concerns about making sure they really do play up to the talent level that they're going to see, because it's going to be a talent level that they haven't seen thus far. But overall, shout out to them for making things happen. Micah, what did you see out there?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, credit to the Pacers. The specific players I want to shout out, definitely Andrew Nembhard. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it was reminiscent of what we saw from Jalen Brunson in the Utah series when Luka was out. It was like, man,
Mm-hmm.
this guy, like, when you put more on his plate, he's like, delicious. Yeah, can I have
Yeah.
seconds? Like, he was really just, I think he averaged like 28 and 10 after Hallie went out. Like, very effective, very productive, ran the offense well. There's definitely jokes that like Halliburton's a system player, but that's, I don't actually put stock in that. I think they're both good guards and that are in a very nice system for good guards to thrive in. So definitely a shout out to Nembhard. And he, being on the court instead of Halliburton does help defensively because he is a dogged defender that I really exerts effort on both ends constantly. Pascal Siakam, another guy that I just felt like really established himself as a playoff riser. Like he had tough
Mm-hmm.
matchups in
Oh
this,
yeah.
and I mean he was just giving it to everybody. Like everyone was a mismatch for him, and he just looks so comfortable attacking from that mid post, being a roller. I believe that Caitlin Cooper, who's the best person covering the Pacers, referenced Pascal was their most frequent screener. So this guy, is really a forward, but he's setting the most screens, rolling into open space, and he had a great series. And then of course TJ McConnell, like that dude, what a bargain he is to be your backup point guard, really your third guard on this team. And the energy he brings, like people talk about motor, he has it in just an abundance. Like the energy he brings to a game is so impactful to his teammates. Like his teammates play harder when he's out there. He's so good at controlling the pace. He's got just enough scoring where his lack of 3-point shooting doesn't impact you too much because he's usually got the ball in his hands, or he's cutting along the baseline, or he had a nice layup out of the dunker spot when Siakam was attacking a mismatch. So super impressed with those guys. Definitely expect them to be on all the Pacers teams in the playoffs going forward. I think they established themselves as real playoff guys. So super impressed with them.
Micah, can you talk about if you felt any kind of way about some of these close games? Because we talked about these teams are injured, and some of the games, and not just this series, but in the second round series with the Cavs as well, were close. I personally don't put a lot of stock in that because they did just go 12-2 on the way to the finals, and that's impressive enough for me. But some people do take away from what the C's did because the games were close. Did you do that, or what were you thinking?
Yeah, I would say I feel like they played down to their competition in some games, but I also don't view that as like a fatal flaw. I think that's just very natural for anyone to do in that situation. You do enough to win. I think it would be a funny conversation if they had won every game by 30, because it'd be like, man, people would be saying like they're burning themselves out. They're not going to have any energy for the finals or something. So I think it was fine for how they handled their business, and I didn't see anything that made me think like, oh, this is some huge flaw. The only thing that crossed my mind was watching how the Mavericks and the Wolves have had to problem solve in the West and the different kind of coverages they've had to adjust to, all that stuff. I don't feel like Boston had to make many counters. I feel like they kind of just rolled with what they wanted to. They'd experiment with different coverages, but they
Yeah.
mostly just played their game, and and they were 12-2. So it really, I mean, there's a couple crazy 3-point shooting games, so it mostly rolled pretty effortlessly to this point, even though, like you mentioned, there were close games. So if I was a Boston fan, that would be my only concern. Like, we're going to be more well rested, but the team we're playing against might be at a higher level just based off of the competition they've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lena. I thought you were kind of going the other way with it. I didn't know if you were doing your shtick or or what.
I know it's not rational, but I don't like it. I don't like that you can't dominate the Indiana Pacers without their best player.
Yeah,
I don't like that you just can randomly give up games that weren't really supposed to be competitive. Like you lost games that you sucked in, not that necessarily other teams were playing. I mean, there were some shooting outliers out there, but you're the best offense, second best offense in the league. Like what does that matter to you? I don't like that. Especially when it comes to the teams that you're about to face. It just doesn't instill confidence in me. So do I think it's a smart thing to say that their path to this is, invalid because how close these games were? No. Am I going to say it anyways? Absolutely. So,
you know,
the West and six.
I actually think that part of this just speaks to like how good the Celtics are and like where our like standard, where our bar is for them, because they lost their starting center. He's kind of important to what they do, and I know the team that they were playing had some guys out, but the Celtics had an important player out too, and like I said, they were still able to go 12-2, and some of the games were close, but I thought that you know playing. How old was Al Horford's like 37? How old is Al Horford? He's up there.
Yeah.
And, playing him 40, 40 minutes, 40 plus minutes in a playoff scenario. he was the exploitable part of their defense. So I thought that the Cavs specifically, because they had Evan Mobley who was able to take advantage of that, and even the Pacers had Miles Turner who was able to take advantage of that, and Pascal Siakam had a pretty good series. So I thought that was kind of a weakness for them, and with all this time off, like we mentioned, expect Kristaps to be back game one. Is that correct? He should be back game one of the finals. Yeah, so. They'll be back to whole, which is another reason why I think they have a step to go, or excuse me, another gear to get to. And yeah, I'm not too worried about the close games. I'm pretty confident in their talent and what they can do. So.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the big criticisms of Boston was how they handled late game situations, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't against elite talent, but they did get it done most of the time. So that's at least something they can take with them as they proceed on to the finals. So the other team that they'll be facing in the finals is yet to be determined. The Dallas Mavericks took a 3-0 lead on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Game 4 was in Dallas, and behind incredible performances from Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, the Wolves were able to steal one in Dallas. So now it's 3-1. We're going back to Minnesota for Game 5. We saw this same thing last year where the road team was up 3-0 in the conference finals in the East. Everybody starts talking about, like, well, could this be the time? Someone's going to do it eventually. Is this when the 3-0 comeback will happen? Probably not, but we'll entertain the thought nonetheless. So in this series overall, whether it's how this series lead was established or individual players, I want to see what you guys have been thinking about this one. Lino, I was going to throw it to you first. What have you seen from Dallas and Minnesota?
I think this has been one of the most entertaining series in my eyes in a long
Mm-hmm.
time. I
Mm-hmm.
think both teams are playing really incredible caliber of very late season basketball. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not always pretty, but they have players on both sides throughout the roster who are going to go the extra mile, put their bodies on the line to make some tough baskets or get some tough stops or just have some really momentum shifting plays throughout the series. And so it's hard to even pick out just one because it feels like everybody has had their playoff moment to this point, and especially within this series. The one main takeaway that I want to put out there regarding the discourse around this series is that this series has not had a definitive game yet. I think 3 of the 4 games have been decided within 2 possessions, and two of those games were within 1 possession. And I think that's because these teams are very, very equally yoked. And so a lot of these conversations picking apart players, very specifically Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, have they had some bad moments? Yes. Have they had some flaws in the way they've played basketball throughout these 4 games or even throughout the playoffs so far? Sure. But are they the reason that the Timberwolves are down 1-3 right now? I don't think so. I think it's really just that these games are super close and very minute things are going to have huge impacts. This whole conversation, especially after the Luka game winner over Gobert and that ISO play and that extrapolating into a larger conversation about the defensive player of the year, just feels very short sighted to me in that, I think it is true that Rudy Gobert did not defend that shot very well or stop it. And Luka exposed that because he's the best offensive player. And that was a bad play. Like, Gobert should have chased him off the 3-point line, made him settle for a mid range or run into the paint and just settle for tying the game rather than biting so hard on the pump fake. At the same time, I think Rudy Gobert's impact on this series has been incredible. I mean, just number wise, his net rating, I believe, at least before that game or before this past game, was a plus 21. This offense is better when he's on the floor. The defense is insanely better in the floor. I believe his net versus Dallas is a plus 26. Like, the offensive rating is 2 points better. The defensive rating is 25 points better when he's on the floor. Like, he does not have a lot of flashy defensive plays, but when you watch players get into the paint and he's there, offense just does not happen. And that is something you pay a premium for, because that is a big part of offensive players like Kyrie Irving's whole game is getting to that rim. And we've seen his more passive games, especially the other night in this last game where he looked a lot more passive than normal. A lot of that has to do with Rudy Gobert playing his best version of basketball. And so I think that has been kind of a seed in every conversation around this series. And it's been a bit frustrating because I think all of these players are having incredible games. And you have to talk about something, but I wish there's at least a little bit more appreciation for what all of these guys are doing on the floor right now. Caelan, what have you been seeing in the series, and what are your thoughts so far?
Last episode, Micah, you asked us which matchup we were interested in watching, and I said the Derek Jones Jr. and Anthony Edwards matchup was one that I was going to be watching, and for me, that's kind of been the story. You know, sometimes I like to oversimplify like a series, like kind of narrow it down, and for me, like that's kind of what I've been focused on. And that Denver series, Anthony Edwards really could not be contained by any one player on Denver's team. And, you know, we talked about this time and time again. You know, easiest way to generate offense is to get two on the ball. But best way to do that is to beat your man. Well, in that Denver series, like they were sending two like on the catch. So like the reads for Anthony Edwards were easier to make, right? He's a good, not great decision maker with the ball in his hands. Like he's solid, but he's not on that Luka level, right? And in this series, when not only are they not sending two on the catch, it's just kind of Derek Jones Jr. out there, but he's not somebody you're going to beat easily. And the Mavericks defense has really been on a string. It's really been impressive. Like they're playing like five guys, like team defense, and it's really been spectacular to see. And because of that, I just think Ant has been like incapable of really unlocking the puzzle of this series. Um, and I think that's even why like Karl Anthony Towns has kind of struggled a little bit. I really feel like Anthony Edwards helps unlock him. You know, if it's going to be a lot of Karl Anthony Towns having to generate his own offense because there's a pack pain and Ant can't generate certain looks for him, then it's going to be tough for him. And I think we've seen that. No coincidence that the first game Karl Anthony Towns breaks out, they win. I think the interesting thing about this series, so you know, history says the Timberwolves have no chance. I don't think they're going to come back in this series. I actually think they're going to win tomorrow night, and I think that Luka and Kyrie will be awesome in Game 6 in Dallas, and I think that's when the series will be over. But I think that if the Timberwolves were able to get one of those games early on, a few of these games could have went either way. If they were able to get one of those, then it could have really been a series. I don't think that the
Mhm.
Timberwolves can be consistent enough in what they do to win 4 games in a row. Um, that's why, man, yeah, losing those first 3 games, they could have got one of those. It could have been a completely different series. So it's really a tough break for a Minnesota team that I don't think is like completely outclassed by Dallas the way it's kind of looked, or a 3-0 series would suggest. Just a tough break. Luka and Kyrie. Some of those shots that they're hitting in the fourth quarter is really just the difference, to be completely honest. Lee talked about some of that defense from Gobert, and he has been strong, but sometimes like those floaters from Kyrie, there's just nothing you can do about that. There's literally nothing you can do about that. And some of the shot making from Luka in the fourth quarter, I mean, that's just what he does, and it's going to be tough when the Timberwolves don't really have that. But that's kind of what I've been seeing. Micah, what do you think about this series so far?
Yeah, I love what you were saying about the Anthony Edwards versus the Mavs defense component of this. I think that's been the most interesting matchup. And I think something I underrated going into this series was the level of rim protection that the Wolves had faced so far in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
First round, it's Nurkic. Second round, it's Jokic. Two guys that are probably bottom 10 rim defenders at center in the
Mm-hmm.
league. And Gafford and Lively have been so good protecting the paint. And that's in the pick and roll for sure. But what Ant gets so busy with is just attacking one-on-one because he can get by. I mean, Caelan, like you said, Terry Jones Jr. has done a great job, and
Oh yeah.
Ant is still blowing by him on a lot of possessions, and he's crashing into multiple bodies. And
Mm-hmm.
Gafford, especially, he's had problems on offense, but defensively is such a force around the basket. He's so athletic, he's so sturdy, you can't knock
Mm-hmm.
him back. And so I think that's been something that I wish I would have realized going into this series, paid more attention to that. Yeah, Ant will probably get by his guy, but instead of Nurkic or Jokic, there are big athletic bodies down there waiting for him at the rim. And that's just one component of it. The way they have shifted their entire defense to Ant. Jackson Frank on Twitter posted a great clip where Ant's ISOing on the right wing and all the Mavs are shifted to the right, and Nas Reed is in the weak corner with his hands up, open for a three, and Ant won't make the pass. And we've seen several times in this series Ant try and make that skip pass, and it's way too high. Sometimes the guy's able to catch it, but it was so high, they can't shoot it, and the defense is there by the time they land, or it goes into the fourth row. And that's just stuff that, Ant's so young and he's the best player on a conference finals team. So that he's way ahead of schedule. He's doing great. And that stuff he'll get eventually. But right now, that stuff he's still having to figure out in real time. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the last two games he's been so much more aggressive with his drives, getting to the free throw line more. And I think that's almost because it's a necessity, because I don't think he trusts himself to make the skip passes, but he knows I'm more athletic than anyone on the court. I'm going to try and dunk on these guys. They probably won't call every foul because he probably gets hit every time he drives, but he's getting to the line a lot more, letting them set their defense. So I think that's been so important, and it's been so interesting to watch him kind of analyze this defense.
Dude, those skip passes, and see that's the thing. Like that's the difference between Luka and Anthony Edwards, and I'm so serious. Like Luka is great at those skip passes because he's great at manipulating the defense first. I feel like a lot of times, like Ant is trying to force those skip, like a couple of his skip passes just still out of bounds because he's trying to put so much heat on it to get it over the. But he's not manipulating guys first with his eyes, with his action, right? And like that's kind of like the separator in his ability to make decisions and run an offense. So I think that's ultimately why Luka's gonna win this series. He's really he's probably the number one guy in the league that you want with the ball in his hands on the perimeter, running a pick and roll, making decisions. He's really that capable.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought
what
that up too. You go ahead, Lino. Sorry.
I was just gonna say it reminds me of that clip of Anthony Edwards from the last All-Star game, or maybe the one before that, where he's talking about, or they talked about how the coach had drawn up a play for him to throw a lob pass to, I think, LeBron or somebody. And he was like, nah, get somebody else to throw that. I can't throw lob passes. That's so funny because I do think that is related to his inability to make some of those more highly advanced reads.
Yes, no question.
And so
No
that's
question.
just funny that's actually extrapolated into something that's become incredibly important for their game. Not that Gobert really has the hands to catch a lot of lob passes from man anyways, but if that's something that both of them could work on this offseason, Minnesota might have the best offense in the league next year.
Oh, man.
But I think you're right that the Mavs have really shrunk the floor for Ant.
Oh yeah.
But I do, and I feel like that has been a really fun piece of the puzzle that one team has put together. But I do like that Ant has tried to make those paint touches, get to the free throw line, but even in his drive, specifically getting to the free throw area, because for what it's worth, that skip pass is much easier to make from the middle of the floor than it is the opposite wing. And so that is something that will at least make that pass slightly easier and did seem to work out for them. What were y'all seeing when it comes to Kyrie Irving over these past 3 games? I think he's had obviously some incredible gameplay and some huge plays, but I feel like the last game he kind of reverted back to some of the previous series we've seen from him. Do you feel like there was anything in particular going on there? Anything that the T-Wolves have figured out, or just one of those off nights for Kyrie? I'll go to Micah first.
Yeah, they did something that I talked about pre-series, which is they put Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie.
Yes.
And I thought that was something they should have done from the beginning. And not to be to oversimplify it too much, but Luka's going to get his. And Kyrie is somebody, especially at his age now, that you might really be able to limit and have an impact on. And I thought Jaden McDaniels did an incredible job. He's got great length, which that's what you want on Kyrie, a lot of lateral quickness, a lot of length. And he, stayed with them, navigated pick and rolls well. I will say I thought maybe, I don't know, half of Kyrie's misses were on Kyrie. Like, I think this still could have easily been a solid game from him. So it's not something where I'm like, okay, well, Kyrie's now going to be a 16 point per game scorer in this series like he was against OKC. Like, he'll get to his spots, and he's so good at attacking Gobert in that drop. But I did think Jaden McDaniels had a huge impact. And, that was only possible because Ant did a credible job on Luka without, getting exhausted. So credit to both of them and the coaching staff for going to that.
Yeah, you definitely said it. That's what I was going to say, that kind of matchup switch. But this is why what I was saying earlier about it was so important for the Wolves to get one of those early games, because like that matchup switch, it did help them win Game 4. It's not going to help you win 3 more games in a row. Like that won't work. You can't just keep doing that and expect Kyrie and Luka not to unlock it. And that's what the playoffs is. It's matchups. It's back and forth. That's why when you win a game, it's easier for that other team to make the adjustments. And it's so important, man. I really wish like this should have been a 7-game series. Like the way these teams have played and the way these games have ended up, like this should have been a 7-game series, and it should have been an either way thing in Game 7. But man,
No,
that's
and
just
we're really just one Nasri 3-point from having that. Like,
mm-hmm.
there's a Nasri 3-pointer. This would be a 2-2 series, which is
Right.
pretty crazy and somewhat unfortunate. I feel like we're missing out on at least 3 incredible basketball games. But
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe we'll still get them.
Yeah, I mean, two of the next 3 are in Minnesota, so I mean, there's a real chance they could push it. I wouldn't bet on it, but it can happen when it's the road team that has that 3-0 lead. So
Hey, don't let them get one.
listen, they did, and you could tell the Wolves, they were loose, they were having fun. I did want to talk to you guys about Cat. I don't think that's somebody we have done a lot of deep dives on. I had notes written on him before last night's game, and then I kind of like had to look at myself in the mirror and be like, was I a prisoner of the moment? How critical should we be of this guy? He just had a game that probably saved their season. So, Lino, I'll throw it to you first. What have you made of Karl-Anthony Towns in this series and in the postseason overall?
I think Karl-Anthony Towns is probably playing at a level one chair above where he should be. Like, he should probably be your 3rd best player on a team, and he'd be an incredible player. Like, if I imagine Karl-Anthony Towns in a position like Kristaps Porzingis, it'd be practically the exact same thing, because this is an offensively talented guy. He doesn't necessarily have the mindset or the vast skill set to be a huge impact player in the same way guys like Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo do, but he does have a lot of talent. His attitude, his personality off the court, those are things I could just really care less about. But as far as what he does on the floor, if he'd stop fouling so much, he'd really
Oh
be
my
a
goodness.
relatively effective player. Like,
Oh
I
my
don't know what's
God.
that about. The way he complains is if he doesn't always do it. Like you are always fouling out. Like, that is clearly a you problem. But otherwise, he's gonna have, he had the really bad shooting night, but a guy like Karl-Anthony Towns is going to have those every once in a while because he just simply can't put together that many good games in a row, which is probably his biggest flaw, is that his ceiling is so high. His consistency, I don't know if it'll ever get any higher, and that's going to be an issue for them. So with Karl-Anthony Towns, I'm glad he had a great game. 4 for 5 from 3, shot 69% from the field, but also only took 13 shots. And so, it's nice to see him being efficient and smart with the basketball in that way, and his, proclivity to really force it sometimes didn't show up, and that was really nice and very helpful for the team, I imagine. But Caelan, what do you see when you look at Karl-Anthony Towns?
I think that I almost want to bump him down to like if he was like a 3rd option offensively,
Exactly.
or maybe if there was like another guy who was just as talented on some nights as Karl-Anthony Towns offensively, so he wasn't always your number 2 option. if he didn't have it, you can go to the other guy, because that number two guy really needs to be. He needs to be a guy who can reliably generate offense when the number one guy doesn't have it going, or if the other guy's being loaded up on. You got to be a guy who can punish the defense, and he can. I just it's not reliable enough.
Mm-hmm.
And almost after watching this playoffs, and Micah, you alluded to this, it almost feels matchup based now. Where if he
Mm-hmm.
has the right matchup, I think I said this maybe Micah, the episode you missed. I said he was a great front runner, but he was not the guy you
Mm-hmm.
want. When things were tight. He's awesome when things are going well if he has the right matchup, or if Anthony Edwards is cooking, then he can kind of beat off of that and he gets better looks. But in a series like this, when the defense for the other team, is all five guys are playing well, he's not reliable enough, and that's kind of been my issue with him. And I don't know if they can overcome that, not just this year, but in the future. I think we're going to talk about the T Wolves offseason a little later. I can't wait to talk about that. So
Hmm.
Yeah,
we'll see.
and before you go, Micah, I just want to say I thought the front rower was the word I was looking for, but just the fact that Karl Anthony Towns he can be your second guy,
Hmm.
supplementary to your first guy. He cannot be your second guy when your first guy doesn't have it. Like, there's like two very different types of second guy, like a guy
Hmm.
who is really 1B and a guy who's legitimately has to be the second score on your team, and he can't
Yes.
elevate to be the first score on your team.
Yes.
And because Carl, like, he just does a great job of shooting the basketball sometimes, but
Hmm.
when the defense is literally keyed in on him, it is a whole different ball game. So that was a really good point. But Micah, what are you seeing, or what do you think about Cat?
You guys, it was like you were reading my notes. This series, I feel like, has really highlighted to me. And to be clear, like when we're talking about this, we're talking about this in terms of winning a championship. Like a lot
Hmm.
of discussions on this podcast, that's not how we frame everything because there's a lot more to basketball than that. But in the conference finals, but that's what we're really looking at. And with a team as good as the Wolves, that's what I mean, they're ready, they're on the cusp. What little tweaks do they need to make to win the title? And at the highest of high levels, and this will sound more like hot takey than I mean for it to, but Carl Towns feels like a role player to me. And a very high level role player, but not someone I
Hmm.
would consider an all-star at the end of the postseason, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. So it's like you guys said, it's matchup dependent and somebody you really don't want to rely on. If it's a good matchup, awesome. He probably allows you to blow out a team you might have narrowly beat, but he does feel almost like Michael Porter Jr. with the Nuggets. It's a guy where it's like, okay, this is like a luxury. It's like it's cool to have this. The problem with Towns, and we'll get into this more once we get into the Wolves offseason, the Wolves are about to get very expensive, and Towns for the next 4 seasons is making 50 million plus a season. And if the Wolves do lose in 5, lose in 6, I think that'll be the questions we'll kind of start asking. And we can get into that more in the offseason segment. But it's definitely the player I am paying the most attention to in terms of someone that could get moved on from their main guys.
I kind of like the MPJ comparison in the sense that um, like MPJ is obviously a great shooter, just like Cap. And when MPJ is giving you the rebounding and the hustle, right? Like that's when that's when you really like MPJ. And it's kind of similar for Cat when he's playing smart basketball and he's on the court and he's taking smart shots, and he's active on the defensive end. That's when you really like Karl Anthony Towns. But sometimes, you don't really get that version of him. If his shot isn't falling, it may affect his other play, and it's kind of tough to be paying that much money, like you said, Micah, to a player who does that. So
Definitely. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's some of it is just basketball IQ stuff, really. The crazy drives, the wild passes, the fouls when you don't need to foul, it's tough. And I do just want to say, like, we just had a pretty critical conversation of Cat, and none of us brought up like his personality or like how he
Dude,
carries himself. There's been just like disturbing
I
discourse.
almost wanted to not bring up that article, but
I haven't
that
heard
freaking
this.
article on
What was it?
was it Bleacher Report? It was truly a disgusting article that was just talking about Karl Anthony Towns in ways that he really didn't deserve. I saw segments of it and I was like, I wouldn't touch this with a 1,000-foot pole, but it circulated a little bit. I think everybody overall in general was like, this is terrible. Why would you write something like this? It has nothing to do with basketball. It was just kind of shitting on Karl Anthony Towns as a person just because, he's had a couple
He's cringe.
difficult moments.
He's just
Yeah.
cringe. He's cringy. That's
He's just
all. Like he's
That's what
yeah.
that's what the article is saying. It's like, oh, he made the worst mistake of all. He's cringe. And it's like, this is a person you're talking about. Like this, like,
very, very over the top for like this is more cringe than Karl Anthony Towns. It
right.
seems.
yeah.
Right. The irony of the article is that actually.
Yeah, it's like you just are looking for someone to beat up, probably because I don't know. It seems like there was some projection going on there that
Yeah.
hard to speak on. But Karl Anthony Towns, I've been rooting for this Timberwolves teams for a lot of reasons. Obviously, I see a lot of talent on this team. But from a narrative standpoint, guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards have had some really crazy things happen in their life over the past 5-6 years. And to see them kind of come together, two very different personalities come together to be on a team that could almost win a championship. It does suck that this kind of seems like it's not going to get there, but the road so far has just been really awesome for them. And I know it means a lot to them. And this team filled with a lot of guys who probably haven't gotten second look since they got traded, like Jaden McDaniels, Nas Reed, Kyle Anderson. These are some forgotten names in the NBA that people would have assumed would just be role players. But coming out of this season, every single team wants a guy like those three guys I just named. And so, for all the flaws in Karl Anthony Towns games and even the flaws in Anthony Edwards games, I'm just if this is the end of their series and they don't make it to the finals, I'm really excited for the run that they went on. I'm excited for the future of the Timberwolves as they've got a really impressive core here that they can work on moving forward.
That's well said. Yeah, and the thing is, like, sure, people that don't pay that close of attention to the league are probably like a championship or bust kind of thing. But if you pay
Mhm.
attention, just making a conference finals in the West, just winning 2 series in the West is an incredibly impressive thing. And especially for a team with young guys leading the way offensively, other than Conley. So huge, and you can tell how we talk about them. I think it's safe to speak for all three of us. We love both teams in this series. We think very highly of them. So it's
Mhm.
great basketball. And with that being said, we can transition to our next topic, which is a little finals preview. And if it feels right, if it feels like the basketball is culminating the way it's supposed to, I think this is going to be an awesome finals. This is a season of parity. It is teams having to figure out, put together the best roster, and it feels like all the way back to last summer to now, it's really culminating in what should be an awesome series. We are going to talk primarily probably about Mavs Celtics, just again because of history, that's most likely the outcome. But we'll talk. We won't rule out the Wolves entirely. We know the power of the dark magic, as Lino calls it. If we spend a whole pod talking about Mavs Celtics finals, then Timberwolves will definitely win. So, but let's get into a little finals preview because I think there is a lot to talk about here. And again, we'll start with the version of it that looks like Mavs Celtics. And there's a million ways to go here. So, Caelan, I'll throw it to you first. We'll get into all the different depths of it. But just what's the first thing you kind of popped to your mind when you looked at this matchup?
I love a NBA Finals where the the best player in the finals is on the worst team, and the other team has at least 2 to 3 guys that make sense in guarding him. I just love this part of the finals. That it feels very final bossy for Luka. This is a great champion or potential champion to vanquish. Tatum and Brown and Derek White, and they have a lot of guys to throw at Luka and Kyrie, which make it really fun because I think Luka is the second best player in the world, and I love having a guy of this caliber trying to win his first championship against a team that is equipped to defeat him. So that's the funnest thing for me in this series. Lino, what about you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is like the top of the mountain for Luka Doncic. I think he is going to have a legacy defining moment here, win or lose. And I'm really excited to bear witness to it, that's for sure. But I also am excited for this team that is around Luka. Like, this is a big moment for Kyrie and the totality of his career. Like, we're coming towards the end of his career, and he's finally getting that moment that I think he always sought for after he left the Cavs. Like, he always looked for that moment where maybe he wanted to be the number one, but he didn't want to be the number two next to LeBron James, which is funny because he's doing it next to Luka, who's arguably the best or second best player in the world again. So it's kind of full circle in that way. But he's doing it in a way that I think is on his own terms. And I think that is going to be very exciting for him to really challenge the Celtics team, because this shouldn't turn into the Derek White show again. God save us all from that happening. But like, Kyrie has the opportunity to really make a difference here. And the role players on the Mavs, I feel like they have the size, they have the athleticism. And if the defense they've shown against this team and even against the OKC Thunder is any example of what they can do, I think the Celtics are going to have a tough time. But all of that also flips over to the other side. You know, the Celtics, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, this is a huge defining moment for them. They had one of those moments before and they missed out on it against the Warriors, but they get another chance. And I don't know that they'll get another one after this. Like, the idea that you can take this version of this team to the finals again and again, it just doesn't really fit into the grand scheme of the NBA, especially with how contracts are just going to end up working out over time. And this is their moment to finally say, look, all excuses are out of the window. We are relatively healthy. We have an insane amount of talent. We are the best team in the league. We should get this done. But they're not going to, like, for all the crap they get about beating some really weak teams in the East, if they pull this off, this will be one of the most impressive, I think, finals championships on either side, because these teams are incredibly talented. And I'm just super excited to see what happens from there. But Micah, what are you thinking about this potential finals matchup?
Yeah, so in this iteration of the finals, and you could argue this would be true for the Celtics Wolves matchup as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think the single most important skill on either side is Jason Tatum's passing. For all the reasons we just covered about Anthony Edwards, Tatum will be asked to make that same skip pass. And how often will he be willing to do it? How comfortable will he be making that pass? How accurate will they be? How will those shooters be able to knock it down? Because we know Drew Holiday's open in the corner. If Derek White's open in the corner, that is a incredibly effective shot. And the Mavs will have to be careful how many of those they give up, but it'll all be determined on if Tatum can make that read. And the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot with Boston is they have their bigs pop more than almost any other team. So they run pick and pops with Horford, pick and pops with Porzingis. And so what that does, and I was watching a couple clips of this from Boston and Dallas when they played in March, is Tatum gets the screen for Porzingis, right? So he's driving on the right side. Porzingis pops out to the top of the key.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tatum now doesn't have to make that skip pass because he's drawn two to the ball in this drive. So he just has to kick it to Porzingis. That's a much easier direct pass. Now Tatum has two on him where the weak side was you have the guy in the corner, let's say it's Derek White, you have the guy on the wing, Drew Holiday, and then you have Porzingis up top. And sometimes it might just be two on that side. But the point is, now it might just be a swing kind of action. Like Porzingis might catch it, Drew's man closes to him, he throws it to Drew, open three, or so on. Maybe Derek White's man comes over to Drew, one more pass. But that's the thing about the Celtics is they have so much talent and so much shooting that their guys don't have to make the same advanced reads that Anthony Edwards does for Minnesota because their lack of shooting, because of how they can compact the paint, because
Right.
they can spread you
Mm-hmm.
out like crazy. And so
Whoa.
Tatum probably doesn't have to be the level of passer that the Mavs have had to make Anthony Edwards and that he struggled with because the reads will probably be more simple. And Tatum's a better passer than Edwards, in my opinion. And he'll make some skip passes, but the threat of that popping big, if it's the five, Porzingis or whoever, that'll be really interesting to follow. And that's definitely something I'm going to be watching early.
And I also want to say that Porzingis can make that skip pass from the top of the key. Like he's got
Mm-hmm.
the vision and he's got the height to really throw it over anybody to get it to the corner. So it's much less of a skip pass, but he doesn't even necessarily need to swing it to that guy on the wing. Like if he sees that guy's open, I feel like I've seen him make that pass several times now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's going to be dangerous for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be very interesting to see how Gafford and Lively handle being out in space. So some big guys are just completely just uncomfortable. I remember earlier this season I was watching a Knicks Celtics game, and Mitchell Robinson was just so uncomfortable in space. But when the Knicks put in Hardenstein, they played so much better because he was much more mobile, big, and he was able to fly around. And so it's gonna kind of depend on those guys and how how they're able to rotate. And so I'm definitely eager to get a look at that big man matchup for sure. But also
Yeah.
eager to see Tatum on Luca. I feel like that's probably the guy you want to put on him. Not every possession because that is a tall task, but Tatum is bigger, longer, and most importantly, stronger than McDaniels. So I do expect them to have some success. And even Jaylen Brown is, stronger than, McDaniels. So, and I think that's kind of what McDaniels is lacking is, that strength. He has decent enough size, but when you're dealing with Luca, he can definitely push you off your spot if you're a wiry guy. So I'm interested in that defensive matchup as well. Is there a matchup that either one of you guys are looking at right now?
Another one I'm excited about that you alluded to is the bigs after the switch. So in
Mm-hmm.
that game in March, there were a couple reps where because Porzingis had hit a few threes in the opening quarter, they did just start switching the pick and roll. So they would just switch Gafford onto Tatum.
Yeah.
And he had some good reps, in my opinion. Like I was very impressed. It's the traditional, like you see with the big, he has to play a little too high so he gets blown by, but had a nice recovery block. Lively had a good possession, very similar when he was on Drew. So that matchup will be really interesting to me. How much Dallas has to switch because of the shooting, and then how those guys hold up in those matchups. And then also the Jaylen Brown, like you were alluding to, Caelan, like in the regular season, Jaylen was on Luca the majority of the time. And I agree with you. I think Tatum makes more sense,
Yeah.
but it's like Missoula likes to do weird things. Like I was watching the opening quarter and they had Tatum on Lively, and so they could just switch the Luca Lively pick and roll because they had
Hmm.
Jaylen Brown and Luca. And because Drew's so versatile, Derek White's so versatile, they can do stuff like that. So that'll be really interesting to see how they decide, how tricky to get because you just don't want to show Luca anything two times in a row. So I feel like they're going to be doing all kind of wacky stuff. They played some zone in that game, which
Yeah.
Luca, didn't struggle with that very much, but I think they'll be showing a lot of different looks.
Yeah, the coaching matchup definitely very interesting, and Joe's he's sort of a strange dude, and he's sometimes excuse me, sometimes has an unorthodox style of coaching and an unorthodox style of offense and defense that he likes to run. And I think that Jason Kidd has just been awesome this playoff run. Just really just awesome
I was
kind
going
of
to say the same thing.
managing these guys just all season. And, he's a guy who I kind of, I've said it before. I just like him, and I like that he has a championship. And he's a serious dude. He knows what it takes, and he's been a little polarizing, I think, a bit in Mav circles, but definitely showing his brilliance so far. So I think that the Mavericks may have the coaching edge in the finals.
Yeah, they
What do you
definitely.
guys think about as far as the depth going into this finals? I was just looking at the Celtics game against the Pacers, and they really went like five deep with like Xavier Tillman getting 8 minutes. Peyton Pritchard getting maybe 9 minutes. Do you feel like it's just that the rest of the way?
I have in my notes, not sure if Pritchard can play, question mark,
Mhm.
because in
Yeah.
that game in March, he checked in and like you don't see it on Luka's face, but you can just watch him tracking him when he's bringing the ball up the court. Like he doesn't say anything. Pritchard's man knows, come up, set the screen. It was like an and one immediately.
Mm,
So that's I'm not sure because Pritchard like couldn't really play in previous Miami series for these same reasons. And Luca and
mm,
Jimmy aren't identical players, but they're similar enough to where I think you can draw on how Jimmy's had success in that matchup. And the same thing like with Jimmy versus Drew is another thing that can kind of apply to this series where Drew's an incredible defender, but Jimmy, obviously, I mean, it was an out of body experience, but he had a lot of success last year against Milwaukee. And just referencing that, there was a possession in the March game where they had Drew and it was off a timeout, I believe. So Luca was ISO'd. They like cleared out the right side. So it's just Drew on Luca and Boston sent no help. And so I immediately like put the slow-mo button on the NBA.com website because I was like, okay, this is about to be so informative. Like, how does Drew look with a Luca post up? It's like 3 dribbles, spin move, layup. And I was like, okay, so they're gonna need to send help no matter who's on because his Luca's just
yeah.
huge and he's just got so much touch. Like it's gonna be really interesting to see how they throw different bodies at him and who can be allowed to be on the floor. Obviously, Porzingis coming back, then you get Horford as a great sub,
Right.
Yeah.
but
That'll help.
Hauser, like, can you play him a
But I mean,
lot?
it's also the same issue on the other side. I don't think Josh Green can have any minutes in this next series.
Nope.
And Tim
Mm-mm.
Hardaway Jr.'s already been taken out of the equation, and you still have minutes you need to take away from people. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Yep.
that's going to be tough there. Hopefully they can get Derek Lively back because
Yeah.
that's going to matter a lot when it comes to subs and things like that. We definitely don't want to see Dwight Powell keep these 3 minutes he's gotten so far, in which he managed to be a -4 plus minus in that last game across 3 simple minutes. But yeah, that's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. And I would not be surprised if this is just 6 players against 6 players
Mm-hmm.
for 7 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a great point there because, yeah, hopefully Lively can get back, and then you have Lively, Kleba, a little bit of Jaden Hardy, be a little bit of Josh Green. But, Lino, like you alluded to, almost the inverse of what I was saying earlier. Tatum liked that Josh Green matchup.
I
He,
like that, man.
yeah, yeah. And this is when Josh Green was starting. And so he's on Tatum. I think this is the second quarter at this point. Tatum gets 2 straight baskets on him. And so they come out of the timeout, and I think they put DJJ or somebody else on Tatum. And Tatum called over to Jaylen Brown. He's like, no, bring Josh Green back. That was good for me. And then he scored on him again. So that's somebody that I think has given Dallas pretty good minutes. I mean, he's had some Josh Green kind of mistakes, but pretty good minutes in this Minnesota series. And I don't know how much he'll be able to play versus Boston. But the DJJ, I mean, it's going to be another huge series for him. I wanted to ask you guys. So I assume PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. will guard Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. How would you guys do those matchups? Which one would you put PJ on? Which one would you put Derrick Jones Jr. on?
That's a good question. Oh man. I think I like man. I wanna I wanna put my best perimeter defender on their best perimeter player. Like that makes sense to me. Tatum Tatum is a little long, and like PJ athletically kind of matches up well with him. He has the size and strength to kind of match Tatum pretty equally. So that's a tough call. I'll probably I'll probably go PJ on Tatum and Derek Jones Jr. on Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown can get off too, so it's not somebody you just want to ignore. So you might start there, and they could do some switching, or I'll be interested to kind of see how that works out. But what about you, Lino?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think they're probably going to see both. I think those are going to switch from game to game or even quarter to quarter as those teams make adjustments and really putting the fresher body on the hotter hand. And I think they're just going to address that via committee. I think PJ Washington probably has the better chance against someone like Jason Tatum. And I think DJJ would have the best chance of really getting into Brown. Like, I think he can cause a lot of issues for Jaylen Brown in the same way that he does for Anthony Edwards at this point. And I think Anthony Edwards overall is going to have to show that he's had a better series against what I think Jaylen Brown would have against Derrick Jones Jr. So we'll see how that
Yeah.
happens. I'll be very curious to see. I think you mentioned this early, Micah, but when those guys get tired of trying to attack PJ and DJ, when they try to switch onto someone like Gafford and
Mhm.
Lively, and
Or
seeing,
Luca.
or
Yeah,
Luca for that
yeah.
matter.
That's probably the thing that they're gonna do a lot is just kind of match up on Luca and just make him work and try and tie him down. If anything, um, doesn't make the most sense to try and beat your head against Derrick Jones Jr., which feels like that's what the Timberwolves have done. Just try and keep going through him over and over again. It's not the most effective strategy.
No, that's exactly right. And something Stan Van Gundy's been calling for on the broadcast is for Minnesota to target Luca on switches. And like you guys were saying, there's no doubt Boston is about to do that. He's
Oh
going to be
yes.
called up constantly. There's a possession in the March game where they got cross matched in transition. And so Luca was on Jaylen Brown. And again, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, let me really pay attention. How's this going to look? And one. Just immediately just drove right to the basket. And now this, playoff Luca, like he's a lot more engaged defensively
Right.
and stuff. So it's not the same thing completely, but I definitely noted like, okay, that was not a lot of resistance on that one. Do you guys want to do predictions for this matchup?
Yeah.
Okay, Caelan, what are you
Feels
thinking for this one?
cursed, but fine.
Oh man, dude, I've gone back and forth with this so many times. I thought that because I said Mavs in six over the Timberwolves, and I thought that the Mavericks would win the NBA Finals. And there was a point a few days ago where I was leaning Boston because I kind of love the complete team. I, I think this might be Luca's time though. I think I'm gonna go Mavs in six. Is how I'm gonna lean. I love that Kyrie Irving is here next to him, already having won a championship in this exact support role next to a player who is like 99% of LeBron James right now. Like it's kind of an ideal setup for him. And I'm gonna lean on the best player in those high leverage moments, getting the job done. And I don't trust, you know, Tatum shot making over Luca and Kyrie shot making. So I'm gonna go Mavs in six to win an NBA Finals. What about you, Link?
I gotta say the same. I gotta go Mavs in six. I just feel like the main philosophy I think a lot of us go by: who's the best player on the floor, who's going to make it happen. That's Luca, bar none. And I'm excited to see that happen. But also, I think a lot of these games are going to come down to the wire. And while the Celtics have proven to be better these days at finishing out games, Luca is the game ender. Like, this is a guy who, like, his job is to make 7 shots in a row in a game that felt like it was over. And it'll flip. Like, that's happened to Minnesota twice where they're like, okay, we've got a decent lead. We can hold on to this and maybe even just go back and forth. Like, we don't even have to get a stop on every possession as long as we're still scoring. No, Luca hits 5 different varying difficulty shots, and now they're up by 3, and then they're up by 6. And he can just do that. And I expect him to do that in this series as well. I feel like I believe in the Dallas role players at this stage and what they've been through in the playoffs a little bit more. I do think the Celtics are going to get a bit of a punch in the mouth facing real talent, real healthy talent for the first time in a while. And I think all those things are going to matter here at the end. But not to say that the Celtics don't have a chance, but I got to go with my Mavs for 6 games, ideally. What about you,
Nice.
Micah?
Yeah, you guys hit on a lot of the points I wanted to. I feel like if you ran this as a 2K simulation, it would be like Boston in 7. And I think because of the same points that you two made about clutch time offense, who I trust more down the stretch, I think Dallas will be able to keep games close enough to where that will matter. And for that reason, I did go Dallas. I went Dallas in 7. Boston weirdly hasn't been great at home in the playoffs. And I just feel like that, this series deserves 7 games. So that was kind of my thinking with that one. But, obviously could go a bunch of different ways. But it is such an exciting matchup. I'm very stoked for what it could turn out to be. Not to totally disrespect the Wolves. I feel like we should at least do our predictions if it happens to be Wolves Celtics. So, we don't have to get into it too much, but let's say the Wolves do pull off the first,
Sorry, I
3-0
can't even hear
comeback.
that without laughing. That was just funny just hearing it.
So they just pulled off the craziest upset in NBA history. They're exhausted. They just went through the gauntlet of the Western Conference Finals. If it goes to Game 7, they're gonna have like 2 days off. They walk into Boston, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna go kind of poorly. I think their defense will be able to do a good job on Boston, but offensively, Boston was the second best defense in the NBA, and I think Minnesota would really struggle to score. Boston's always going to have a weird game or two, so I ended up going with like Boston in 6. What would you guys think, Lino? I'll throw it to you first, since the Wolves are your adopted team.
T-Wolves in 7.
Cool.
Don't
Okay.
ask me how. Just remember this a week from now, 2 weeks from now.
This is so funny, guys. I probably would say Boston in 5. Did you hear what I said about Mitchell Robinson out in space trying to guard Kristaps? Just imagine Rudy Gobert, size 18, 2 left feet, trying to guard Kristaps out in space. It's
Mhm.
uncomfortable for him. But I don't think we're gonna be seeing that.
Okay, but for any
I
Minnesota
cannot
fans
wait for the
listening,
Supercuts, man. Don't worry, T-Wolves. Don't worry, Minnesota. I got you on my back.
I
We're doing this
I
thing,
really
baby.
I'm really invested in my Mavs in 6 over the Timberwolves because I'm trying to buy back credibility with the listeners. I've been pretty bad with predictions this playoffs. I'm haunted by my
This is going to
son's
be devastating for you if this doesn't go well.
my son my son's in 5 haunts me, bro. It just haunts me. I was so confident. And I think about that every day. So
You think you would have learned to stop doubting the Timberwolves at this point?
oh, we're so close. I want the Minnesota Timberwolves to win tomorrow night, and Mavs win in Dallas, Game 6, and I'll have nailed that perfectly. Mavs in 6, and I'll be right back into my basketball Nostradamus setup that I got going.
nice.
Definitely got
Well,
going.
we'll wrap it up shortly. This is normally where we do an off-season rundown. This is we only have 2 teams that have potentially been eliminated: the Pacers, and then again we expect the Wolves to be eliminated. They technically haven't been yet. So we don't have to spend a ton of time on it. Just want to give each of you an opportunity to talk about anything you might find kind of interesting about these teams' off seasons, whether it's a player you think they need to prioritize, or a type of player you think they should really try and add, someone they need to get rid of expeditiously, whatever it might be. Caelan, I'll throw it to you first. Off season for Wolves or Pacers, does anything kind of stand out to you?
Can we talk about Karl Anthony Towns, please?
Mm-hmm.
Please, let's at least scour the market. We have to offend him the way the Heat offend Tyler Hero by putting him on the trade block every year. That's how we got to do this guy because he's talented enough where you could say there's not a guarantee you're going to find an upgrade at his position. There's no guarantee. He is a talented player, but I think that's probably the number one priority. Now, the Wolves do have to decide if they want to eat this tax bill or if they want to, ship some guys off. But if I'm them and I want to win an NBA championship, I feel like I have to unlock that. That's the piece right? Like that's their their Aaron Gordon acquisition or whatever. That like they have to figure that out, right? Because the Thunder are going to be trying to figure out Josh Giddey. If they figure that out and you don't do your cat thing, then it'll be tough to beat them. So you gotta move around with cat. That's what I'm looking at. But what about you, Lee?
I will not gratify a conversation about the Timberwolves being eliminated before it happens. You won't catch me on record pretending that they've been eliminated already. Do I think they should move Cat? Yes. Should they go get a younger point guard to replace Mike Conley so you can have a point guard in the 2 years that he retires? Yes. But I'm not talking about that. The Pacers need to run it back. I honestly don't think they need to change too much. I like the way this team is built. I think if they have a full off season together, Tyrese Halliburton gets healthy, I think they will have balanced out the defense a little bit. They could probably go get some role players. Like they can go find a really like defensive wing if they could maneuver something like Cam Johnson or Mikal Bridges. That'd be interesting. I don't really see the pathways there, but that'd be cool. But if that would change too much about their team, I probably wouldn't do it because I'd be interested to see what this iteration looks like with the full season.
What about selling high on TJ McConnell? Would you consider that? Sell high on him.
Yeah, you could do that.
The best he's ever going to be. Not going to be this good
yeah.
again.
If you depending on what you could get back, I still don't believe people would give you a lot for him besides a bunch of draft assets, and you don't really need draft assets right now. But if you could get like a really defensive guy that maybe with a little bit more size that could maybe bolster the perimeter defense a bit, that could be huge for them.
Did you
But
guys say Caleb Martin, TJ McConnell sign and trade, or was that just?
hey,
He
I'll sign
is.
on the dotted line right now.
TJ is going into the last year of his deal next year. He's making $9 million, but that's his last. So that is a very valuable thing to move.
Yeah, and they have Nimhard. Their guard minutes are pretty covered. So,
Mm-hmm.
and not to mention, Benedict Mathurin, whatever he turns into. I think just to kind of hit on both of the things you guys did, I think the cat thing is definitely worth looking into. To me, and this is like not super advanced analysis because it's right in front of you, but I think the Wolves need to find like their version of Kyrie Irving, like their true
Mhm.
number two creator. And I think Cat might be the only vehicle you have to try and acquire a player like that or acquire the draft assets that let you eventually get a player like that. But you might not get anything close to that, and he might just need to be your second best offensive player, and that's how it goes sometimes. So we'll see there. And then the Pacers, I think they're young. They're pretty good. They already are out 3 draft picks. They might as well just kind of keep it going. Their like front court probably needs to be sorted out a little bit. Obi Toppin's a restricted free agent. Jarris Walker is a prospect I liked. He barely played for them, so they probably need to figure out exactly what they're doing there, just because those guys both essentially play Pascal Siakam's position. But other than that, I think both teams are in good spots if they just run it back. Other than the finances for Minnesota, so. But yeah, that was the show, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. It has been just a delightful round for the playoffs. Almost all the games have been close and competitive with a lot of fun kind of storylines throughout. So we appreciate everyone for listening. And just as always, continue to rock with us. Our next episode, we will be talking about the finals. A game will have already happened as long as our schedule stays like it's supposed to. So that is crazy to think about. And we're definitely excited to break all of that down for you guys. So for myself, Micah, my co-hosts Lino and Caelan, thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any questions, email us at confidenceirrational@gmail.com. Check us out on TikTok at Irrational Confidence Pod. And we will see you guys next time.